All right, so you can see on this assignment how many points each problem is worth. Be sure to show all of your calculations and box the solution to make it easy to find for the grader. And it's a good idea, you can just use this as the cover page. You don't have to add any additional pieces of paper. Just write your name on this and use this paper itself as the cover page for the assignment. So that's due at 11 o'clock. In order to submit the assignment, do you need one more? In order to submit the assignment, you need to be present and on time in class. And so if you're arriving after 11 o'clock, then the late work isn't accepted. Another thing is I don't carry a stapler with me. So you'll have to staple your papers together before you arrive. Any questions related to these announcements? All right. Today we're going to be talking about some of the very first basic information, interest rate and rate of return. I will mention that I've already scored the concept inventories that you completed on Sunday, and I was really pleasantly surprised. There were some students that got as many as 8 questions right, so I was pretty impressed by that. I didn't expect anybody to get any of them right. You know, honestly, you haven't learned any of the information from the course yet, but I think some of you already maybe had previous economics class or maybe just life experience that helped you to understand some of them. So as a reminder, all of those points are just bonus points. You don't have to worry if you didn't do well on it. As long as you signed your name onto the in-class exercise, you got full credit. But any points beyond that 1 is going to be counted as bonus homework points. So today we're talking about interest. And interest is something that you pay when you borrow money. Sometimes it's called a profit rate rather than an interest rate. But the calculation concepts are the same, regardless of the name that it's called. When a borrower takes a loan from a bank, from a family member, from any kind of an institution, the person who's loaning money doesn't do it to lose some of the money. And especially because the loan is going to be generally paid back over time, and in any case at a later date than the money was received, you have to pay back more than you first received in the loan. And so if you go to a bank and borrow 100,000 dirhams for a car, they're going to want more than 100,000 dirhams back. Because remember, last time in class we talked about how money in the future isn't as valuable as money now. Remember, prices are always going up. In 10 years, food will be more expensive, cars will be more expensive, rents will be higher. Everything is going to cost more in the future than it does now. So what that means is that a certain amount of money today, if you took that money to the future, it wouldn't buy as much. In the future, that same amount of money would be less valuable than it is now. And so someone who's borrowing from a bank thinks that the bank is taking a risk because they're giving over this valuable money. The money that's in today's terms is worth a lot. And what they get back in the future isn't going to be as worth as much. And so that's part of the reason why they require interest, is to cover that difference between the present value of money and the future value of money. So, interest is what's paid by the borrower. If we have a different perspective, if we're now looking at this situation from the perspective of the bank, then what the bank is thinking is that they have a rate of return. Because in the case of this first instance, the bank is the investor and the borrower is a person. But sometimes companies will borrow money. It's not just individuals that borrow money. Even big companies like phone companies, banks borrow money so that they can turn around and do other things with it. So let's say that you are the investor. You have some extra money and you want to try and earn more by investing it. When you give it to a corporation in the form of a loan, the corporation is going to give you your principal back, that's the original amount that you gave them, as well as some interest. And so what we would call it, instead of an interest rate, which is the perspective of what the borrower is paying, when we're looking at this situation from the perspective of the investor, what they receive is a rate of return. Even though quantitatively the percentages are the same, it's just a matter of perspective. So any questions so far about this slide? All right. Let's go through some terminology. We're going to use this all semester long. So these are important phrases and words that you're going to need to know. Interest is, one way of thinking about it is the manifestation of the time value of money. That's kind of a fancy way of saying the extra amount that's required to account for future money is worth less than present money. So you can think of it as the fee that you pay to borrow someone else's money temporarily. Or you can think about it as the difference between the ending amount and the beginning amount during that borrowing process. So interest is how much you owe now versus the principal. So let's say that I go to the bank and I borrow 100,000 dirhams so I can buy a car. And I promise to pay it back in 1 year. And what I promise is that in 1 year, I'm going to give back 101,000 dirhams. So what would be the interest? If I received 100,000, I'm paying back 101,000. What's the interest? Just the amount. 1,000 dirhams. And as a percentage, that would be 1,000 divided by the 100,000, which is 1%. So that's where interest rate comes into play. Interest is talking about the absolute amount. Interest rate is when we're expressing it as a percentage of the original loan. So it's the interest that's paid over a time period expressed as a percentage of principal. And principal is the starting amount. Okay? So here's the formula for interest rate. It's the amount of interest per time unit. And the most common time unit that we talk about is year. And in fact, it's so common for us to talk about year that sometimes people don't even mention percent per year. They just say percent, and it's implied that it means percent per year. So you'll see some examples of that phraseology in just a few minutes. So it's the interest amount per time unit divided by the principal times 100. And that's the interest rate. It's the same formula for rate of return. If I flip back to the previous slide, interest divided by principal times 100. So this was interest rate, rate of return. It's the same formula. It's just remember that for those two definitions, the perspective is different. If it's from the lender's perspective, meaning the bank, or the investor, the lender or investor, which is one perspective, or the borrower's perspective. All right. So what we're going to do today is work through some in-class exercises. And I've mentioned this already in the last lecture that I don't want to talk at you for a full 50 minutes, especially not about financial stuff. I mean, it's maybe one thing to talk about engineering for 50 minutes and you can get interested and excited about that, but there's only so much money you want to hear about in 50 minutes. So I'm going to hand out this in-class exercise and ask you to get together in pairs. I would prefer it if, for today, you not work on this one individually. I'd like for you to work in pairs. And we're going to do some calculations that are related to the formulas I just showed you. And you're going to get some exposure to the time component there. The interest being expressed in terms of per year. So, I'm not going to collect these back. So you can be neat or sloppy. It's not going to hurt me. But the advantage of being neat on these in-class exercises is that it's going to help you on the homework. So this is something you're going to take with you at the end of class, and you can think of it as like your jump start to being able to do the homework correctly. All right? So is everyone paired up with someone they're going to work with on these? You can swing the desk around if you need to. At the end of the class, we're going to rearrange all the desks and make it nice again. But until then, I'm going to be circulating around with the solution, and I'd like you to show me your answer when you get there. All right? All right. Okay, the first question is asking if you borrow 20,000 dirhams from a bank that charges 5% annual interest. Okay, now sometimes they're going to not even bother saying 5% annual interest. So it will just be implied. So if this problem said, if you borrow 20,000 dirhams from a bank that charges 5% interest, you'd already know, well, they mean 5% per year. All right? Unless it specifically says 5% per month, or later on we're going to have a different kind of problem where it says 5% interest compounded monthly. So you'll need to be on the lookout when we talk about compounding a little later. But for now, I just want to point out that annual interest is a little bit redundant because the 5% itself implies the annual part of it. So what's the total amount that's owed after 1 year? So I was walking around and everyone did really good on this problem. I'll point out that if the currency is specifically mentioned in the problem statement to be strictly correct, you need to also mention the currency in your answer. Because sometimes this semester we're going to be switching back and forth between different currencies. So AED 21,000 is the correct answer for that first one. So pretty simple stuff so far, right? Any questions about the first question? All right, let's look at the second one. What rate of return will you earn if you invest AED 200,000 in a company, and after 1 year they will pay you back AED 212,000? So we assume that what they're paying back there is partly the principal, 200,000 of it is the principal, and then the extra amount that they gave you, the 12,000, is the interest. And so back to the formula of rate of return. The rate of return, since you're the investor here, we're calling it the rate of return. So it's the amount that you earn, the additional amount, the interest, 12,000 divided by the principal times 100. So as a percentage, that's 6%. Is that good, by the way? Is that a good percentage?
Yes.
It's pretty good. Does anybody here have a savings account with a bank? I do. I have some savings accounts, and they're horrible how little they give you for saving money. In the United States, you're very lucky if you can find a bank that will pay you 1%. So you put in $1,000 and they keep your money for a whole year, and at the end of the year they give you only $10 as the bonus for keeping your money that long time. 1%. It's terrible. The interest rates used to be a lot higher in the past. I remember the first time I was living in the UAE, back in like 2008, I was earning 6% from one of my banks. So, that was the norm in the past. So a lot of people these days are doing something, what's called chasing yield. Going from investment to investment, trying to find something that would give you higher interest. Because nowadays, the amount you can get from a bank, they're paying less than the rate of inflation. So, prices are going up faster than they'll give you interest. So in a way, it's like when you invest money in a savings account, you're losing money because things are getting expensive more quickly than you're earning interest. We'll go into all of that later on in the semester, but 6% would be a pretty good yield. If you can find someone who's offering you 6%, you should definitely take it, unless it's too risky. And that's the other thing is, you can always lose your money if it's not a guaranteed investment. So, more about all that later. Any questions on the second problem? All right, the third one is a little more tricky because we've got currency differences, and this thing about time is a little bit more complicated in the third problem. Anybody know what an ISK is? It's the Icelandic krone. Nobody here has used Icelandic krone before? I did for the first time last summer. I went to Iceland. It was beautiful, but it was very cold up there. Like even in the summertime, it was maybe maximum temperature during the day, 10 Celsius. So our winter is their heat wave, right, in Iceland. The advantage, though, is that there was loads of daylight. I was there at the end of July, and it was bright enough to just be walking around with no lights at midnight still, and then it would get kind of dim overnight, and then about 3:30 in the morning it would start to get bright again. So there's plenty of daylight. You can go see lots of things when it's very bright in Iceland. So if you get a chance, go to Iceland, and maybe you'll need to use some ISK. So Peter's savings account today has $55,123.45. So that is after the growth, because in the past, the account was smaller. what we know is that this account is earning 3% interest. So what was the value of the account 1 year ago in AED? And then you also have the exchange rate. Now, the way this exchange rate works is the units are shown down here on the next line. So that makes it a little more complicated. So it's 35 ISK per AED. So if you have 1 dirham, they'll give you 35.25 krone. That's the exchange rate. So there's different ways to solve this one. I'll show you what I did. First of all, I exchanged today's value from krone into dirhams. And you'll notice that I'm writing the units as I do the calculations. I don't just write the numbers themselves, because if you always are consistent and write the units as you do the calculations, it's easier to spot your mistakes. And everyone's going to be making mistakes. I made one earlier today in an example that I showed in an earlier class. It's easy to forget things, but it's harder to forget things if you are always writing the units like this. So the krones cancel out from the numerator and the denominator, and what we're left with is 15,063 dirhams and 79 fils. So that's the value of the account today. And then a year ago, here's how I sort of set it up in my mind, is that our total today is because of the initial amount plus the initial amount times the interest rate. And so this quantity, initial amount times the interest rate, is the interest. So what he has today is because of the principal plus the interest. We know the total today, and we know the interest rate, but what we don't know is what was the original amount. Is that the same way that everyone else set it up? More or less? You can call it different things. So I said total is x plus x times 1.03, where x, the unknown, is what was the initial amount, that was the principal that was deposited. So the total amount today times 1.03 times x. So this is the amount that was initially deposited, 1518.24 in dirhams. So any questions about that example? All right. Let me show you some important things about how we visualize the exchange of money. All right. So we're going to use a standard notation this semester where we'll have a timeline like this, and we'll keep track of time 1, 2, 3, 4. This will be the number of years, or more specifically, the number of time periods, because sometimes we're going to do problems where we'll take a look at, on a monthly basis, what's happening. But we'll mark the passage of time on the horizontal axis, and then on the vertical axis, it will be amounts of money. So I'm going to call this amount over on the vertical axis. So let's take the example of Peter's savings account. What Peter did at year 0, at the beginning, at the present. Now this is a little bit tricky because the way the problem is phrased, we are at year 1 in this problem. So we're now at year 1, but the first thing that happened, we're putting at year 0. And we call year 0 the present. So the initial thing that happened was a deposit, and this was the amount. And so we write deposits like this, an arrow down. And so we would say AED 1518.24. And then at year 1, the value of the account is 1563. So we could withdraw that amount, and a withdrawal is a line up. So you can think of a line down as your spending money, and a line up is your receiving money. And so that's our standard notation for something called a cash flow diagram. And we are going to do a lot of cash flow diagrams through the semester. We're going to be doing them because sometimes these problem statements get so lengthy, like the words of it. But when you can translate the words of what's happening into a picture, it makes it a lot easier to understand, especially when you're having to move money around from time to time. So any questions so far? Cash flow diagrams? All right. Today is going to be one of the few days through the semester that we finish early, but before you do, I want to show you on iLearn where a few things can be found. All right, so if you go to My Grades, anytime you give me something, I'm going to grade it as quickly as possible. I've got a good homework grader for the semester who's going to be turning around things relatively quickly. I'm going to go through the submissions you gave me for the introductory exercise this afternoon. I'm going to try and have the grades posted as soon as possible. So when you click on My Grades, it'll show you your weighted average as well as the points that you've earned on every individual assignment. Lecture videos we already talked about, right? But here for the lecture notes is where you can choose between how you like to see the lecture notes and print them out for the whole semester. I think that they have a big industrial printer over in the post office on campus that's near the main building. So you can take this PDF file, if you like 3 slides per page, then you can take this and print it out there. Or if you prefer more compact, fewer pages, 6 slides per page, sort of jams it all on there. So here's all the slides we're going to use for the whole semester from Lecture 2 to Lecture 43 when we finish. But let's see. Oh, another place you can get it printed. You know Matagere? There's a copy shop by the parking lot. So that's another place that you could check on. I don't know how the prices compare, but it would be a really good habit. It would help you stay organized. If you print all the notes and put it in some sort of a binder like this, keep the in-class exercises, keep the assignments, and then everything will be together for you to study on the exams. All right. Any questions? Remember this day. I did let you out early one time, all right? Remember it. All right. Keep those in-class exercises. Hold on to it. Let's look one last time at the announcements. Homework 2 I've given you. You can get started on that today. Does everyone have a copy of homework 2? There's no reason to delay. You can start on this afternoon if you like. All right. So I'll see you on Thursday.